There's a hidden truth about the psychology of people who never seem to need anyone's approval. And most people have them completely wrong. When they succeed, they don't announce it. When people doubt them, they don't defend themselves. When someone criticizes them, they just nod and keep it moving. Most of the time, they answer with 3 quiet words: "I'm good." But deep down, those words mean a lot more than indifference. They carry a certainty. I've already decided who I am. And out of habit, people start putting labels on them. You might think they're arrogant, emotionally closed off, or just too proud to care what anyone thinks. But the truth is, their calm isn't a void. Inside them, there's an anchor, a deep, invisible center of gravity that keeps them steady while the world around them spins. If you're someone who secretly craves outside validation to feel worthy, or if you feel thrown off because someone you care about seems completely unbothered by both praise and criticism, then this video is for you. Today, we're going to unpack this form of self-sufficiency through the lens of psychology, and more importantly, what it actually takes to build that kind of unshakable inner foundation. To truly understand someone who never seeks validation, you have to completely let go of one very widespread misconception: the belief that not needing approval is a form of coldness or emotional detachment. In modern psychology and neuroscience, specifically through the self-determination theory developed by doctors Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, we know that human motivation runs on 2 very different fuel systems. The first is extrinsic motivation. That's when our sense of worth depends on external sources: compliments, likes, recognition, other people's reactions. The second is intrinsic motivation. That's when our drive comes entirely from within, rooted in personal values, inner curiosity, and a stable sense of self that doesn't need outside confirmation to exist. Just before we continue, my name is Jaina, and we just launched this channel for people passionate about psychology and human behavior. Just like you, the goal is to understand the hidden mechanisms behind people, emotions, and social interactions. If you want to help us keep going and improve the videos, think about subscribing. It's free and it makes a huge difference for us. Okay, let's continue. Most of us spend our entire lives running on the first system without ever realizing it. Every time we post something and immediately check for reactions. Every time we downplay an achievement while secretly waiting for someone to tell us it was actually impressive. Every time we change our mind the moment someone pushes back a little, we're showing just how much of our identity we've outsourced to other people. But people who never need validation have, consciously or not, made a permanent shift to the second system. And the way that shift happens isn't what most people imagine. This kind of psychological independence doesn't appear overnight. It gets built over time and usually through discomfort. And from a psychological standpoint, it almost always traces back to one of 3 core mechanisms. Origin 1, earned identity. Nobody is born with an unshakable sense of self. But psychologist Erik Erikson, through his theory of psychosocial development, showed that people who successfully navigate the identity formation stage, usually in adolescence, but sometimes much later, develop something a lot of people never manage to build: a clear, stable answer to the question, "Who am I?" that holds up regardless of what anyone else thinks. This usually happens when someone has been tested, when they stood by a position that made them unpopular and held it anyway, when they failed publicly and rebuilt themselves without waiting on anyone's permission, when they made a choice that let down people they loved and learned to sit with that discomfort without falling apart. Every single one of those moments is a deposit into what psychology calls identity capital. And once someone has built up enough of it, other people's opinions just stop landing the same way. Not because they went cold, but because they finally became whole. Origin 2, the aftermath of too much validation. Here's what actually surprises people. A lot of individuals who never need validation from others aren't people who never received it. They're people who got way too much of it and eventually saw through it. Imagine growing up in an environment where every drawing is treated like a masterpiece, where every average result gets celebrated like something extraordinary, where every decision is met with unconditional praise no matter what the quality was. At first, it feels amazing, but over time, something quietly breaks. The praise starts to ring hollow. They begin sensing a terrifying gap between what they're being told and what they can actually observe in themselves. So those individuals are forced, almost involuntarily, to turn inward. They build their own measuring system because the external one proved unreliable. And once you've built your own internal compass, borrowing someone else's starts to feel pointless. Origin 3. Deep self-awareness. Finally, there's an origin that has nothing to do with childhood or relationships. Some people simply develop through reflection, reading, therapy, or just lived experience an unusually deep understanding of themselves. They know exactly what they value. They know precisely where their limits are. They've spent enough time sitting with their own darkness that it no longer scares them. For these people, external validation doesn't just feel unnecessary. It feels slightly beside the point. It's like someone giving you directions to a place you've been 100 times. You appreciate the gesture, but you don't need the map. Their self-knowledge has become so solid that no opinion, positive or negative, can fundamentally shake the image they hold of themselves. So what's actually happening beneath that calm, unreadable surface? Let's break down 3 psychological truths quietly playing out inside them. Truth 1, their calm is not indifference. When someone never seems rattled by criticism or puffed up by compliments, we assume they just don't care, but that's almost always the wrong read. What's actually happening is that their nervous system has learned to process external feedback without treating it like a life or death situation. Neuroscientists who studied self-concept clarity, a term developed by researcher Jennifer Campbell, found that people with a stable, consistent sense of self show significantly lower amygdala reactivity when faced with social rejection or disapproval. In plain terms, their brain doesn't register criticism as a threat the way most people's brains do. They can hear the feedback, consider it rationally, decide whether it's useful, and never once experience it as a personal attack. They're not tuning the world out. They're just not held hostage by it. Truth 2, they are not immune to self-doubt. This might be the most misunderstood thing about people who never seek validation. They doubt themselves deeply sometimes. The difference is they've developed what psychologist Carol Dweck calls a growth-oriented relationship with uncertainty, where most people rush to kill the doubt by looking for reassurance from others. These individuals have learned to sit with it until it actually tells them something useful. They ask themselves harder questions. Is this doubt pointing to a real gap I need to close, or is it just fear in disguise? They don't silence the inner critic. They interrogate it. And because they've done it enough times, they no longer need someone else to pull them back from the edge. They've built their own way out, and they know they can always build another one. Truth 3, the approval they give themselves is not arrogance. Maybe the most dangerous assumption we make about these people is that their self-sufficiency comes from an oversized ego. But research on self-compassion, particularly the work of Dr. Kristen Neff, draws a sharp line between self-esteem, which fluctuates based on performance and comparison, and self-compassion, which stays steady no matter the outcome. People who never need validation are rarely operating from ego. They're operating from something quieter and far more durable. They're not telling themselves they're better than everyone else. They're simply telling themselves they have the right to exist as they are, and that one quiet permission granted from the inside removes the urgency to go looking for it everywhere else. And yet, even when they seem perfectly self-sufficient, something essential is still quietly playing out beneath the surface. Because the truth is, these people never stop caring about human connection. They've just redefined what genuine connection actually looks like. They're not scanning the room for approval, but they are watching closely for something far more specific: authenticity. They want to know if the people around them are real, if the environment they're in is honest, if the feedback they're receiving is sincere rather than performative. When they sense that it is, they open up fully and with a depth that genuinely catches people off guard. When they don't, they simply stay closed, not out of pride, but because their instincts are telling them that not everything deserves their trust or their investment. That's where a lot of relationships with these people quietly break down, not in arguments, not in dramatic falling outs, but in the slow, invisible process of them realizing that the connection being offered is conditional, surface level, or built around what they can provide rather than who they actually are. When that realization sets in, they don't make a scene. They just become a little less available, a little more distant, not to punish anyone, but because something essential has just been quietly reevaluated in the way they see that relationship. So how do you actually build that kind of inner foundation? And how do you genuinely connect with someone who already has one? The answer doesn't lie in complicated psychological techniques. It comes down to one core practice: learning to become your own primary witness. If you're someone who relies heavily on external validation, the most powerful shift you can make is to start giving it to yourself, not through hollow affirmations, but through honest self-observation. After every significant moment, good or bad, ask yourself this question before you ask anyone else: what do I actually think about how that went? That sounds almost embarrassingly simple, but for people who've been wired to outsource their self-assessment, it's genuinely radical. Over time, the habit of checking in with yourself first, before checking anyone else's reaction, starts to rewire the relationship between your actions and your sense of worth. You start becoming someone whose opinion of themselves is built on real evidence gathered from the inside, rather than borrowed impressions gathered from the outside. And if you're someone who already lives this way, this part is for you. Your independence is not a barrier to intimacy, but it can become one if you forget to leave the door open. The people around you can't always tell the difference between chosen solitude and quiet withdrawal. Give them a signal. Not an explanation you don't owe them, but a small, honest gesture that says, I'm here, I'm just processing, and it has nothing to do with you. Something as simple as, I don't need reassurance about this, but I still want to share it with you, can completely shift the dynamic. It reminds the people who love you that your self-sufficiency isn't a wall, it's just the foundation the relationship gets built on. When you step back and look at the full picture, something remarkable becomes clear. People who never need validation are not people who stopped feeling. They're people who stopped handing their feelings to others to process for them. In a world that profits enormously from self-doubt, from the endless hunger for likes, approval, and outside confirmation of your worth, these individuals represent something truly radical. A life where the question, do they think I'm enough, has been permanently replaced by the quieter, steadier knowledge, I've already decided that I am. Their confidence isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up consistently in the way they make decisions without waiting for a committee, in the way they receive criticism without unraveling, in the way they walk into a room without needing to be the most noticed person in it. These people are not cold. They're not checked out. They don't think they're above the warmth of human connection. They've simply done the long, unglamorous, deeply private work of becoming someone they can count on. And from that place of inner reliability, everything they offer other people, their time, their attention, their love, lands differently because it's given freely, never performed, never traded for approval. Their self-sufficiency seen clearly is never arrogance. It's an open invitation to show up as you actually are, to connect without an agenda, to build something that doesn't need constant reassurance just to survive. And someday they will find, or maybe already have found, the people who don't need them to be any different. People who understand that someone who doesn't need your validation is actually the most trustworthy person you could ever choose to give it to. If any of this resonates with you, or if you love someone who moves through the world this way, drop your experience in the comments. And remember, not needing approval isn't a flaw. It's the result of a long, quiet conversation with yourself that most people never have the courage to start. If this video gave you something useful, share it with someone who might be ready to hear it, because understanding this today might be exactly the permission someone needed to give themselves. I'm Think Within. Subscribe so we can keep exploring the hidden corners of the mind together. Take care of yourself, and I'll catch you in the next one.